Okay, good. All right, let me get this on presentation mode. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, but you'll need to start your show.
All right, you
There you
able
go.
to see that? Perfect.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank y'all. So I'm Daniel Bowman. I'm the state forester for the Pacific Island area. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about forestry and fire. Just kind of want to point out this is a 10,000 foot view. And when it comes to fire, it might be a 100,000 foot view. There's a lot of topics to discover and to talk about in this, and I only have so much time. So this is really brief overview. And if you have more questions, you can always reach out to me or the field office. Let's get started. So I always like to point out resource concerns. So when planners go out and the field ops go out, they look at resource concerns. These are just a couple of them: plant structure and composition, terrestrial habitat for wildlife, improving plant productivity and health, improve soil health by maintaining or increasing organic matter. Fire is also a resource concern. There's a lot of resource concerns out there, but what we do is go out and we assess resource concerns and we use conservation practices to address those. I'm going to start just with civil pasture first. So anybody that has grazing land and actively grazes that wants to add trees to their operation, this is the practice we utilize. So civil pasture is where we add trees to a grazing operation. The main three ways we do that, we have three ways of doing it. Shade islands, where we add 2 to 3 trees per paddock. So we'd fence that off, and that it's by paddocks, not by acre. The second option is scattered trees. So when we scatter trees across the property, we're going to do individual tree protection. And with individual tree protection, we're going to use a 16-foot cage. So we'd do a 16-foot cattle panel, we'd wrap it around and we'd stake it down. And we're going to aim for more around 5 to 7 plants per acre on that. That would be across as many acres as you want to do it. You don't have to do your entirety of your operation. And we can utilize a lot of different tree species. It doesn't just have to be native species. It could be things like ulu or koa. It could be a large variety of things. We want to address the resource concerns, and that's our main goal. And then the final would be deferred grazing establishment. That would be if you have an area that you're able to defer grazing. We have a new payment scenario where we can help cover some of the costs to take cattle off of a paddock and then establish these trees. And that would be kind of looking at more like a 75 trees per acre range. You'd want to choose species that are tolerant of grazing when they get a little bit older. So another one would be like ulu or coconut. Coconut, you would want to wait till maybe 5 years old so that the cattle or sheep don't go in there and pull the fronds off. But this can help with a lot of different things. It can help with moisture retention. So you have trees out there on a more arid site during the drought times. You may have a little bit less evapotranspiration. I know when I drive through and I see the kiave on the buffalo grass, the stuff that's under the kiave is the last to lose the greenness. Everything else is bone dry and there's still a little patch of green. So there's a lot of benefits to civil pasture and integrating forestry into grazing operations. It's a little bit higher maintenance, but as we talk about fire, the more maintenance on the land, a lot of times the lower the fire risk. But we'll go on to the next slide. So I also wanted to talk about windbreak and shelter belt. So this one can apply pretty much on any land use. Windbreaks are mainly to reduce wind speeds to protect the property, crops, livestock, the soil. What we kind of look at, and I have a really good chart right here, this kind of shows how windbreaks affect the wind. And we have a rule of thumb. So it's 10 times the height. So 10 times the height of your windbreak is about the length of protection that you get. So if you need to protect a 500-foot field, you're looking at having a 50-foot tall windbreak. And people also oftentimes forget that there's a windward effect. So 2 times the height of a windbreak has reduced wind speed on the windward side. And this has a lot of benefits. This can help with salt deposition on your fields. This can help with erosion. If you're an organic producer, you can utilize this to help reduce the pollutants that come in so that you can maintain your organic. So pesticide drift, herbicide drift. We can really help line out what species would be good for that, how dense you need to make your windbreak, and a lot of times how much of a windbreak you need, because it's typically not just one line. Sometimes you have to protect your home property because you have wind speeds from multiple directions. And what I want to let y'all know is the producers, let the planner know where y'all are having the most trouble from, because that really helps during the planning process. I kind of wanted to point out that windbreaks don't solely only have to serve as a windbreak. They can help add food, they can have forage, and they can also have nitrogen fixation. All I want to point out is we want to make sure that we're planting it to address the resource concern. But if we can plant something that can provide a little bit of food, a little bit of substance, and it's also going to address the resource concern, that is a great benefit to everybody. If you're any producer could definitely look at utilizing a windbreak on Kauaʻi. So a little earlier, I heard somebody asking a question, but I couldn't understand it completely, but I'll take a swing at answering that. And if not at the end, somebody can a little closer can go through it and tell me exactly what you asked. Forest farming and tree shrub establishment, we can utilize two practices to achieve our multi-story cropping specification. And that's where we're taking natives, we're taking timber trees, we're taking non-timber forest product plants. So that's fruit producing, nut producing, flower producing, and we're adding them all in a strategic spacing and utilizing the shade, utilizing our spatial area to maximize what we can plant on that area. So what I want everybody to know is that we do have guidelines. So the basics are that we have to plant at least 150 plants per acre minimum. So we can use your existing property, and if you have that, we only have to go up to 150. But what is on your property will be counted into that count. So if you have an orchard and you want to diversify that orchard, we would need to add more native species in there because we have to have a minimum of 20% native. So if you have 150 orchard trees, we'd come in there and we would add a lot more native. And if you wanted to plant more trees, then we can continue to diversify the fruit producing and the nut producing trees. So 150 is our minimum. We always plant 20% native. We never plant more than 50% non-timber forest products. And that's a fancy word for it produces flowers, fruits, or leaves. If you're going to think about it, if you're utilizing it, it's not native and you're utilizing it for something else other than timber, then that would count in that category. But we can also plant Leucidia and all these other trees for chop and drop so that you can also help improve your soil health while you're going at it. And chop and drop's a great way to do these establishments because they grow fast and it's giving that nitrogen boost to the soil and all the other plants as they're coming in, because this is a high management system. This isn't a plant and you let it leave. When you do this, it's going to be an intensive management system, lots of pruning. And then the other thing I always highlight is we don't convert native forest. If it's more than 20% native and it's an actual native system, we're not going to make it an intensive system. We can help you improve it and add things to it, but we're not going to convert it to a forest farming multi-story cropping system. But we have a system that we can come up with a plant list for landowners. So we take your elevation, we take your rainfall, we take your soils data, and we can come up with a list of plants that likely can survive and thrive there. And then our planners go and work with you on that list to come up with a list of species that will achieve your goals and achieve our standards. The base is around 4 plants in the overstory and 4 plants in the understory. And we're going to space those strategically so that we can utilize the shade and the overstory and how you prune it to ensure that you're getting the benefits. And we can also plant other practices in conjunction to this to achieve that soil layer, conservation cover, and other things like that. So this is a really complex practice, but it has a lot of use and it has a lot of opportunity to continue to expand. Did I hit the question with that?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So tree shrub establishment has a lot of uses. We can use it in agroforestry multi-story cropping systems, but we can also use it to establish native forest. We can establish native plants for wildlife focus or just for the plants. So it doesn't have to specifically be for wildlife. So one case would be we could plant a really heavy koa sandalwood plantation style planting that has some diversity. We want to focus on creating a forest structure that would have naturally occurred, not a plantation. But we want to utilize what we can do. A lot of times we add a lot of different things. So you'll see sandalwood, you'll see koa, you'll see ali'i, ule, and a lot of other plants in there. And if you want to plan for wildlife, our planners can help you by working with our biologists to determine what species to target. Or upland birds the correct species, and kind of come up with a planting list that would provide and facilitate habitat development for those. So yellow-faced honeybee if you're probably closer to the coast, or Kamehameha butterfly if you're focusing on pollinators, which would mean that you'd plant more mamaki out there. So it's a really broad practice, and we can do a lot of things to help landowners achieve their goals with their land. While we're talking about tree shrub establishment, we facilitate practices all the time. So it's really hard just to go into an invasive forest and plant trees. So we have tree shrub site preparation. So tree shrub site preparation, we can go in and prepare the site for planting. And that can range from invasive forest removal to spot spraying. So whether you have, let's say, fallow grassland and you want to move it from guinea grass to a agroforest, we can facilitate spraying those circles so that you can establish the trees and allow for that time for those trees to get above the height of the grass, and we can facilitate that. And we can also facilitate planting in an area that used to be invasive albizia or invasive Christmas berry, really large scale. And with that, we would utilize something else as well, which is woody residue. So woody residue, we use that to reduce the amount of woody biomass that's left on the site after we do our site prep, because we can create more resource concerns when we cut all of those trees down and we leave them on the ground. So with woody residue, we're going to come in and we're going to manage that woody biomass, either hauling it off site or piling it for decomposition, or lopping and scattering. And that'll facilitate not only reducing the fire risk of your site and spontaneous combustion of fuels, but it'll also facilitate the planting of the site for forestry applications and other things. So we're going to kind of go into fuel break and fire break. So when it comes to fire in Hawaii, management is key, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we're going to start with fuel break and fire break. So there's some key differences between the two, and we can help with both of these practices. Fuel break is a strip or block of land that's vegetation, debris, and litter have been reduced or modified to control or reduce the spread of fire. So really what that means is we're not taking it to bare dirt. We're managing the fuels to create an area that's going to slow that fire down. It's not going to stop the fire. We're managing the fuels so we can manage how that fire is going to burn through that area so that firefighters can utilize that slowed burn to fight the fire. You're typically going to mow it or remove trees, but the other option is we have shaded fuel breaks. So you have canopy trees that aren't highly flammable and you prune them up so there's no ladder fuels. And that shade is going to maintain more moisture in the long term. And as you're managing that grass to keep it at a certain level, because grass is good, it keeps the erosion down, it's good for the soil. But that creates a really good area to slow the fire because of that moisture retention and the reduced evapotranspiration. We can use that in conjunction with roads. So a fuel break doesn't have to exist on its own. And something to think about when you're looking at this for maybe your property is it's generally bigger. So it's going to take a little bit more because it doesn't have a solid stop. So you're talking, it can be huge. It can be 200-foot wide, but 45 feet, and you could do, maybe 20 foot on each side of a road so that you're utilizing your existing infrastructure to help provide an area to protect your property. And then that's where we get into fire break. So fire break is typically just a bulldozed or either bare dirt or it's covered in a non-flammable material. So this is where we're taking the vegetation completely out. We have to be very careful on our slopes, our cultural resources. We have to be very careful on how we do that. But it's a really useful tool because the goal of a fire break is to stop a fire. They're not fireproof. Wind speeds can make it jump, and also fuels on either side. But utilizing these two practices in conjunction can provide a really good opportunity to help firefighters control fires on your property before they maybe jump to your property or move to your neighbors. So I wanted to talk a little bit about fire and forestry, just as general. Fire breaks and fuel breaks aren't the end all be all. So the management that you do on your property, and we can help with that. We can come in and prune. We can come in and remove biomass that's going to cause a fire hazard. The management on your property is really where it's going to come in. You have to, the more highly managed, like the speaker at the very beginning said, agriculture really has some benefits, and these highly managed agricultural fields have a lot of opportunities to help us fight fires. So managing the land to carry less of a fuel load, whether it's forestry, grazing, crop, or a mixed use, that's our goal. We want to manage our land, and that's what we're here to help you do. And we want to facilitate these land management objectives that you have. But I would say management is the first key. And I always like to point that out because we can talk about planting a native forest and it being fireproof, but it's not the case. It's how you manage the forest, and it's how we plant, and it's how we design things. And so going in and knowing what your goals are as a landowner helps our planners do that. And so we kind of go into the planting and fire reduction. Designing something that's going to carry less likely to carry a fire it's hard work. You don't plant it and let it go because we have to keep things from getting ladder fuels. We don't want it can burn through a nice native forest if there's a lot of ladder fuels and debris on the ground, and it can jump into the canopy and jump. So managing that forest and designing that forest in a way that's going to have a high canopy and maybe less ladder fuels, or we manage it with fuel breaks and fire breaks in strategic locations that are going to facilitate stopping a fire as it comes through. I just always want to point out that it's really the management of the land, the grazing, the management of the forest, the croppers that really can help facilitate that fire. And that's why agriculture is so important and why we want to help y'all with the management of y'all's land. But in general, when we plant trees, we can increase the moisture management, especially with agroforestry. We're planting bananas and all of these high moisture content plants out there. And that intensive agricultural system can really create a barrier that is hard for embers to catch in. That's all I have today. I'd love to answer some questions, but I want to end with helping you help the land is our goal. Reach out to your field office and see how we can help, because this isn't everything. We can help with a ton of different things. And I'm glad y'all came out today to listen to us.